My name is Michelle Freeman. I'm an attorney at Fleet Smith & Freeman in Shalimar, Florida. And today we're going to talk about the top 10 title defects in the state of Florida. The first thing that we see often here in the state of Florida is when you have an unsatisfied mortgage or an unreleased lien. And a good example of that is when you had a mortgage on the piece of property and it just didn't get satisfied when you paid it off. We actually see that happen quite a bit. The problem with that sometimes is when you have a bank that merges into another bank, or the mortgage gets transferred somewhere, and then you just have to go down this chain of trying to find the right person to get that done for you. Yeah, so a good example of an outstanding lien or an unknown encumbrance would be something like a mechanic's lien or a notice of commencement on your property where you had work done and it just didn't get satisfied appropriately. And usually the issue that we have with that one is trying to find the contractor and track them down because they stay pretty busy, and we need them to sign the appropriate documents to get that taken care of. So an error in a prior deed, the biggest one that we see most of the time is a legal description that was written incorrectly. And when you have a legal description that was wrong, you can't insure title appropriately. You've either given away less than what you had or maybe more than what you had, and then it requires a quiet title action to make sure that the interest of prior owners were appropriately satisfied. So the best example of this type of restrictive covenant that would restrict your use of the property is what we call covenants and restrictions. For example, in a homeowners association or a condos association, and you have certain restrictions that come with living in an association like that. So for example, maybe you had a setback and you built a driveway over it, or you put a shed there, and then those things have to be fixed before you can provide clear title to the next owner. So outstanding real estate taxes, the problem you have there is people don't pay their taxes, and then a tax certificate can get issued. After 2 years, people can go ahead and purchase that piece of property based on their tax certificate. So sometimes we see that it's in that process already and we have to kind of backtrack to get that taken care of, or you've already gone past it and then you have a real problem with actually being able to sell that piece of property that you thought you owned. So an error in the public record, best example for that I've seen is parties get divorced and their divorce decree lays out who gets what property. Wife gets this piece, husband gets this piece, and then maybe they were mixed up. And the husband is trying to sell what he believes is his piece of property, but it was actually deeded to his wife. And usually those parties still aren't getting along, and so getting them to cooperate in that process can be quite difficult. Yeah, we see illegal or wild deeds where people just accidentally sometimes transfer a piece of property they don't own. They get the legal description incorrect, they get the lot number incorrect, and then we've got this wild deed hanging out there that has to be fixed. Sometimes your title insurer will say, if you just make this change in the legal description, then we can move forward. But then there are times that it's worse than that and you have to do a quiet title action. So missing heirs pops up usually when we get a title commitment and somebody who is deceased is still an owner on the piece of property. And we have to go into this process of finding who their heirs are for proper notice in order to be able to sell the property and make sure that you have clear title going forward. So unfortunately, we see this happen a lot in the state of Florida, especially with vacant properties that are owned by elderly people who aren't necessarily paying attention to what's happening to the property or going to check on it often. And people have gotten smart, unfortunately, here, and they find a way to sell those pieces of property, or they forge a document to do it under the actual legal owner's name. And that takes a lot of work to undo that when you're going forward and you still think that you own that piece of property. A boundary or a survey dispute, often you receive a survey for the purpose of selling your piece of property, and then you realize that the neighbor's driveway is over the line, or maybe their fence is over the line, and then you have to take the steps to communicate with that neighbor to make sure that they either move that or that you come to some sort of agreement of how that's going to work going forward. While there are hundreds of different types of title defects here in the state of Florida, these are the top 10 that we see most often. As we said in our previous video, that's the reason that using a law firm is important for your closing transaction, because as these issues come up, we can handle them in-house. For more information on how we can help you with your real estate transaction, please stop by our office in Shalimar, Florida, or give us a call.